Hello, everybody. This is Carter, and welcome to this episode of Making It Up, the conversation series amongst authors. So I've been having a blast with it, and once in a while I get to talk to somebody who is kind of from the film industry, which is always exciting to me because I'm a bit of a film buff, a film, TV. I take both those mediums as probably more inspiration in my writing than I do from reading. Sad to say, I do read a lot. I do read quite a bit, but I mostly read nonfiction. But I love to watch thrillers and to either whether they're movies or limited series. So I feel like that kind of influences me more than the books that I read. And today on the show, I had Joey Hartstone, who is from the film industry. He actually wrote the feature films LBJ and Shock and Awe, which were both directed by Rob Reiner. And he's now actually coming out with his debut legal thriller, The Local, which just released in June. So it was cool to talk to him and get his perspective on kind of making that transition from screenwriting to novel writing and having to fill in a lot more blanks, especially in terms of descriptions. And, because when you look at a screenplay, it's all dialogue and there's some very, very limited set direction, but it's mostly just dialogue. So having to transition to actually, describe things was interesting to hear about. So he was very engaging. I'm very excited that he has his debut thriller out. Good guy. This is my conversation with Joey Hartstone. It's nice to meet you.
It's nice to meet you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. I always, I was going back and looking at the guest notes and it was like, debut author. And I'm like, I love talking to debut authors. But then I realized you're a debut novelist, but you're no stranger to many years of writing.
Yes.
So that I really want to talk about that transition quite a bit because
sure.
I'm super interested in, in screenwriting. I have one of my best friends went to USC Film School, and I've been following his career for a long time. And it's something that's hard for me to wrap my head around in terms of actually writing for the screen. But so you're in Los Angeles, obviously.
I am. Yeah.
How long have you been there for?
I moved here right after college, so 2005.
Oh, okay. And whereabouts do you live?
I'm in Studio City.
Okay. I grew up kind of north of LA in Westlake Village, Thousand Oaks area.
Oh, cool.
And I was there until I was 18 and then have barely
Never came back.
A lot of my friends still live there. And when I do go back, it's a little bit of a nightmare just because I'm not used to it. And it's a little bit overwhelming. So where did you grow up?
I grew up in Flagstaff, Arizona.
Oh, okay.
Not too far from here.
No, not too far
enough.
and I did go through your bio, but I kind of wanted to just talk to you about this. So you're growing up, and did you have siblings?
I have one little sister. She's 2 years younger than me.
Okay, and as you're growing up, what are your parents doing?
My mom was a nurse and my dad did a lot of different things. He went to law school, but never practiced law. He started a lot of businesses, and then he ran for Congress twice when I was 10 and 12 years old, and then once when I was in college. And that was sort of the moment I realized I did not want to be in politics. And I was planning on going to law school right after college, but I just had no energy left for that. And that's probably the reason I never went.
So your dad's running for Congress. How does that inform you? Like, are you politically active now? Is it something that, or did you just go a whole different way because you saw kind of how the sausage is made?
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, I love politics and I love writing about politics, but I have no desire. I think I used to think I wanted to be a politician when I was a teenager and when I was in high school. I thought that would be great. And then watching my dad do it, I thought there's no way. There's nothing about this that looks appealing.
and even less so now, right? I mean, as
It's
unappealing as
gotten
it was then,
Yes.
I can't wrap my head around. I don't care how much good you want to do this world. You've got to be like a real masochist to get into that arena. And I think it must just totally change you anyway. I assume it just beats you down into a pulp.
Yeah, it looks like it. And if it doesn't, it's because you're made far differently than I am made. So
Right. So were you? Yeah, I'm always curious about, inflection points. And some people can see an inflection point in their life. Some people can't. But was there anything in your upbringing that kind of sparked you into not necessarily writing, but, creative impulses kind of beyond maybe what, you're seeing in your friends or stuff like that?
Yeah, it was probably in college. So when I was there, I mean, there were no streaming platforms or anything like that, but somebody loaded up the first 4 seasons of The West Wing onto the intraweb. Yeah. Right. So it was my junior year of college, and all of a sudden I was able to watch all these episodes and watch them as much as I wanted. And I had always loved movies and television, but it had never occurred to me that could be an actual career path. And then something about it, I just thought I really want to try that.
Specifically from being inspired by The West Wing, which has, very sharp, very fast fire dialogue. A lot of people walking.
Yeah. Yes.
A lot of corridor strolling, but it's such a great show, and they do such an awesome job of like having explaining concepts without dumbing it down too much through conversation. So it's obviously very dialogue heavy, which all screenwriting is. So what were you studying in college?
Politics. So I was a political science major. So, but by then I had worked for my dad, and I decided I was not going to do that. So I actually got a minor in film right towards the end of my time there.
Oh, okay. And how did that influence you? Was that something that all of a sudden that took center stage in your interest level?
Yeah, I got very lucky. There were no screenwriting classes when I was at school, and then we had a visiting professor named Mark Weinberg who had gone to UCLA and gotten his MFA in screenwriting, and so it was his first. He's still there, but this was his first semester teaching. It was my last semester at school, and it was the first time I tried screenwriting, and I just loved it. And I really wanted to move out to LA anyway, but he encouraged me to come out here, and then he wrote letters of recommendation for me and was very supportive. And ultimately, I went to UCLA and got my MFA in screenwriting, and that was a large reason why.
It's so interesting how there can just be that person, and and without that person, who knows? Yeah. So that can
drive you crazy.
Yeah, it's fantastic, and that's interesting about it. I've talked to a lot of MFA graduates, and they're all kind of all over the place, but my probably very naive impression of MFAs is, they sound like tremendous programs, but don't necessarily prepare you for the actual business of publishing. In the case of an MFA in screenwriting, that sounds much more practically sound than just a broader MFA in literature.
Yeah, it probably does do that a little bit. I mean, different schools vary. I think USC is more geared toward the actual industry and what you might do. And UCLA at the time, at least, there was a focus on trying to put some blinders on, I think, a little bit, and just teach you how to write, and which, it's up in the air whether that's a better or worse way to do it. I mean, you come out probably a little bit clearer about what you want to write, and a little less clear about what the industry is looking for, and some of that stuff. So,
yeah, but you're also learning, specific formats, right? So, and understanding, page count translation into minutes and that kind of thing. That is very practical, as opposed to, just following your heart and writing a novel that who knows what the hell it's going to be or how it's going to be received. Because you graduated, and then I assume it's just kind of, spec writing. You're like, I'm going to write a screenplay and shop it and see what happens.
Yeah. I always say the best part of being a struggling writer for me was my time at UCLA, because for 2 years I could say I was going to UCLA, and that's what I was doing. And it felt like I was, it's so hard to be in LA, especially if you're a writer, or probably more so if you're an actor or director, and you're trying to tell people back home, this is what you're doing, but you have nothing to show for it. But at least being at school was something to point to. And then you get out and you're back to being just an unemployed writer. And that was 5 more years of that. Right.
And what you have to show for it is 5 years worth of tips at your waiting job.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So it's funny. I was looking at your bio, and which is very humorous and well done, but you kind of made the point, whether ironic or not, that you had all these failed ventures, so you went into writing, which is about the worst venture you can get into, having any kind of expectations of success, much less money.
Yes.
So you graduate from your MFA, and then what's the route? Like day one, are you just like, I got to start earning money, I got to start, what do you do?
Yeah. Well, I did a lot of work in reality TV. Just sort of, that would be my version of waiting tables.
But you were immediately in the industry, so it's
something. True. Yes. I spent probably 5 years watching kind of rough footage for reality TV shows, most of which you would never have heard of, and just logging what was on those tapes. So that was, but UCLA, I was, I'd applied 3 times, and the third time I was applying, I decided to take the LSATs at the same time. And I thought, if I don't get in, I'm just going to go to law school. Finally pulled the trigger on that.
I'll just take the LSATs.
Yeah. And then when I got in, I thought, well, it's okay. The scores are good for 5 years. So if I get out, I'd seen people just struggle for so long, and I didn't want to do that. And so I just kept saying I might go to law school. And then every year it'd be just a little step in the right direction. Like when I graduated, I had an agent and a manager, which is often difficult to acquire.
Yes, for sure.
So that kept me in it for a few more years. And there was just always one thing after another until finally it actually turned into a real career.
Wow. But it's a fickle industry, right? Just as, book publishing is, and you can have a career that all of a sudden can go, I would assume, go away or be on hiatus, depending on the whim of whatever you're working on, or things shut down because of a pandemic, and then there's nothing being shot and no need for writing. But so you took the LSATs and you just never did anything with it.
Yeah, no, I think those scores are no longer valid, and I'd probably have to do it again if I wanted to go to law school. But
talking about a different industry, and probably, so I have a full-time job as well. So but it's flexible enough where I can figure out time to write every day. Right. Man, if you're a lawyer, not a lot of free time.
I don't think I'd be a writer if I was a lawyer. Yeah. I'm not sure I'd be doing anything other than being a lawyer.
Yeah, for sure. So as you're making these little steps forward, I know, well, a couple of things I want to ask you, but was before you wrote LBJ, was there something where you kind of said like, holy shit, this is it. I'm in it now. It's all working out.
No, that was it. That was the turning point for sure. Yeah.
I was just curious with LBJ, did you write that just because you wanted to write it and you wanted to shop it, or were you actually asked to write it?
Yeah, I was asked to write it. It's weird. There's been a couple times in my career where basically everything is slowed down to the point that no one really cared what I was working on. And it's been a blessing in disguise because I was able to do what I wanted to do. So I mentioned I'd gotten an agent. And so I spent probably 5 years sort of chasing my tail, trying to write what other people wanted me to write, whatever was big at the time. So whether it's big comedies or action movies, and neither of those were things I wanted to write. And then basically people just stopped taking my calls. And then 2 producers named Tim and Trevor White, they're brothers. We had a lot of meetings and had a similar interest in politics and true stories. And they had this idea for doing a movie about LBJ that just focused on his vice presidency in the first few weeks of his presidency and trying to kind of grab hold of it before it slipped through his fingers. And it was something that I think my agents at the time probably would have told me not to do. But like I said, they didn't really care at that point what I was doing. So I loved the story, and I thought, well, let me write it. And then when I was done, I thought, well, if this doesn't do anything for me, I'm not sure I can do a much better job for something I'm passionate about than this. So it was a good way to test to see if I actually was going to have a future in this or not.
But it can be an excellent script and still not be kind of the zeitgeist.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
So it just, and those, you always hear the stories about those scripts that then get unearthed 10, 15 years later when the trend starts going that way. So that was, and it is funny when you mentioned like writing in different, categories, action, comedy. That's almost like a novelist saying, I'm going to try a rom-com, then I'm going to try, thriller, and then I'm going to try something literary fiction, and that, which is really incredibly difficult to do. As you're kind of going through that journey up to the point of LBJ, were you finding yourself, interest aside, were you finding yourself better at like, I'm really good at writing X, Y, and Z, but not so much this?
Yeah, I would say I think it's across the board for almost all writers that you write what you want to write. Otherwise, that's going to be the best thing that you can do. So the stuff that you're passionate about. So if you're trying to chase what you think is popular and it's actually not something that interests you, I think it's usually going to show in the writing. I think that was probably the case with my scripts.
Yeah. And you're absolutely right. I mean, I preach all the time about not chasing trends because it rarely works, first of all, because by the time, if you're, at least in the book world, it gets out there, that trend's not around anymore.
It's not a trend, yeah.
But you're right. There's no joy in it. There's no joy if you're just like trying to be the, 51 Shades of Grey.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So, and then when you're writing LBJ, that's a tremendous amount of research. What was that process like?
I actually really liked the research. And that was the first true story I had done. And then I ended up doing that a lot more over the next 5 or 7 years. But it was in that case, there was only one person in that script who was still alive, and that was Bill Moyers. And I never did get the chance to speak with him. But so it was a lot of just reading biographies. And it was a lot of fun. It was especially when it came to the Kennedy men and the Johnson men, who had very different views on how things had unfolded. So it was interesting to read these books and realize just how many versions of history there were, and then to try to marry them into one cohesive story. And
not even marry them into one cohesive story, but distill it to, whatever, 150, 160 page screenplay. That has to be tremendously difficult to decide, like, what's important information, what's entertaining information, and being true to what and hopefully what the actual truth was.
Yes. And then even just what you leave out. I mean, people want to talk a lot about sort of the truth in these movies and TV shows that are about true people, but even the omissions can be glaring and problematic. So that's a
Did you take liberties at all in that, or did Rob Reiner take liberties directing the movie?
No, I mean, obviously there's dialogue and scenes where there was no one in those rooms, so we don't know exactly how those conversations unfolded. But no, I was always very proud of how accurate it was. And at times I think almost to a fault, where I was thinking I'm going to be on panels and I'm going to have to defend this like it's a dissertation and I better have my facts straight. And so I don't know. I mean, I think that the more famous the story is, the more you need to adhere to what really happened, because the audience will know to call BS on it. But it's very accurate. And I'm pleased with that element of it, at least, for sure.
But you can be as accurate as possible, and and if it's a political story, you're still going to have people telling you it's bullshit, even though you're like, dude, I researched this, just because of their own bias, and you're automatically a little bit of a magnet for controversy, kind of regardless of what the political issue that you're writing about is, even if it's just a historic figure. Did you run into any of that, like post movie, about people criticizing the script?
No, there wasn't a lot. There were a couple different portrayals of Lyndon Johnson all right around that time. There was one in the movie Selma that Ava DuVernay directed, and that had gotten it was funny to me because LBJ's portrayal had gotten a little bit of criticism there, as if she was too hard on him. And I actually thought she was more than generous to a guy who did a lot legislatively for the civil rights movement, but was not a hero of the civil rights movement by any means, and had to be sort of shown that it was in his interest to do the right thing before he would do the right thing. So, but no, we didn't get a lot of pushback. He's sort of far enough into history that, and we had enough fun in celebrating his flaws that I think everyone, whether they liked him or not, was sort of okay with the portrayal.
I see. And then, so that has to be a pretty amazing moment when not only does the screenplay turn into a film, but it gets attached to major stars and a major director. I mean, what was that experience like?
Yeah, that was unbelievable. There was that script got on this thing called the Blacklist, which is in Hollywood. It's like the top unproduced screenplays each year, and it comes out in December, and it gets voted on by managers and lower level producers and things like that. And so it got on that, which always gets scripts a little bit of attention. And that's how Rob Reiner found it and became attached. And then there was a financier named Matthew George who really loves history. And so he saw that and he wanted to make a movie, and he had a budget ready, but didn't have the movie. And so all these pieces fell into place. And then Rob got the script to Woody Harrelson, and Woody Harrelson said he wanted to do it. And then I feel like it took probably 8 to 10 months before he signed on the dotted line. And while we were waiting for that to happen, there was this play that Bryan Cranston was putting on Broadway. And then that was getting optioned to become an HBO show. And it was all about LBJ. And with every piece of news about that, it looked like we were going to get further and further away from actually ever seeing this movie see the light of day. But eventually it happened.
But isn't that the case in Hollywood in general? I mean, and I have extremely limited experience. I've had an option, but I just ignore it all because I don't do anything, and I just assume it's never going to turn into anything. That's the preponderance of the time, I assume.
Oh, I think that's the only way to maintain your sanity is to assume that. I mean, until you see it in the theaters. I mean, we were doing pre-production, and all the cast and crew got together to do like an indoor soccer game, and we watched Woody do what we thought was blow out his knee, and we just thought,
and that could be it.
That's it. That's the career right there. It's gone.
Right. Yeah. So many, cogs that one of them breaks and it shuts down everything. Then of course, things like pandemic and stuff like that. So then what kind of trajectory or boost did that give you post that movie for your writing career?
Yeah, so that it was good. It changed things overnight. I would say in the next 2 years, I probably wrote 4 or 5 scripts that I was paid to write, which was a nice change. Right. One of them became a movie. The others did not. But it also just sort of opened up the door for different meetings and opportunities. And then one of the producers on LBJ, her name's Liz Glotzer. She used to work for Rob Reiner at Castle Rock for several years, and then she moved over to working for Robert and Michelle King, who created The Good Wife. Mm-hmm. And so she kind of brought me over with her, and that kind of was my transition into television, and that's where I've been for the last couple of years. And then I assume I'm trying to think what a writer's life in Hollywood is like, but I assume I always hear there seems to be like a pool of known writers that are coveted, and and I assume everyone wants to kind of be in that pool where your name is in the discussion whenever they're talking about. I would love to be. I mean, is that kind of, because I feel like if you're not in that, and I'm just making shit up here, but I'm guessing if you're not in that pool, that you could be easily forgotten about until maybe you have another. But how do you stay in that conversation? Yeah, I would say just trying to write and make sure that you always have a new script to show. But yeah, I mean, to your point, after I think sort of LBJ, I think had a sort of a wake for me of maybe 4 or 5 years where I had steady work. And then I did hit this moment where just because of various factors, including the pandemic, I found myself with no hired scripts to write. Yeah. And then what do? You write a book. You write a novel. Yeah. So that's the interesting transition, because, how different was that for you, and what was the motivation? Because when you set out to write a novel, it's definitely not a stopgap for financial trouble. No. Yeah. It's really a long play. Yes. If you're lucky. So what was your thought process for all that? Yeah, well, sort of to your point about the most of the projects in Hollywood never going anywhere. Even when you're lucky enough to get hired to write a pilot, the pilot usually never sees airtime. So I had worked on a couple projects where I had, and a lot of times they were limited series, so they're based on true events, and I would do the research for all 8 or 10 episodes, and then I'd only get to write one, and it was really unfulfilling. And I had this idea. Yeah. And I'd had this idea kicking around about this legal thriller for a long time, and I wanted to pitch it as a TV series. And I thought, the way this is going, if I'm lucky, I'll get hired to write the pilot and that will be it. But I really know what the whole story is and I really want to tell it. And since the pandemic hit and I didn't have anything to write at the time, I thought, well, let me just try it as a book. And if it's nothing more than sort of the basis for a television pitch, at least I'll feel fulfilled that I wrote the story that I wanted to write, and I'll know how to pitch it better and where it's going. And then I was just lucky that it went further than that.
So what was the process of writing that book? What did you find easier than you expected and more challenging?
Yeah, more challenging for sure is the length, and that was in the editing and the rewriting. That it wasn't writing it that wasn't writing a longer story that was difficult, because it was sort of like writing a short television series in my mind. But a screenplay is usually 120 pages, and a script and a TV show is half that. So you can read it every single day in one sitting, and then do notes and rewrites. And so the idea of having to read it in chunks and then try to remember what happened in other parts, that was definitely, it was just a bigger piece of work to deal with in the rewriting phase.
I would also think internal monologue, descriptions, things that you don't really see in a teleplay so much, or a screenplay, that might get writer's notes or director's notes. But how long do I describe how the room that they're in, and how important is that to the read, and understanding the pace? And I would think, but it's a legal thriller, right?
It is, yeah.
Yeah. So this is just a guess, but I would think like a screenwriting background is beneficial, because you already know how to be pithy and to the point. And thrillers, I think, really benefit from concise language and short chapters and rapid fire dialogue, things like that.
Yeah. But when you're saying what you're saying, it totally rings true for me. The idea of having to describe things, you get almost lazy as a screenwriter. I think like the most famous slug line to describe a location is interior bar, dark, shitty. And that's it, and
right. But we all get it.
Yeah. And that's enough. And then the director and all the production can actually decide what it looks like. But yeah, so having to describe some things like that, I realized I'm the only person who's going to describe it. And if I don't do a good job, the reader and the audience is never going to understand what it looks like. So.
That's true, but it doesn't have to be much, right? I'm a huge proponent. I have "Kill Your Darlings" tattooed on my arm, of really cutting and really distilling to the essence, and literally saying, a shitty dark bar is a lot of times is kind of enough, because the reader gets that. I think, and it depends on what you're writing, but I think some people, over describe, and it really slows the pace down, depending on, depending on what you're writing. So, and it was, in terms of selling that book, is it the same? Did you get a different agent, a literary agent versus your film agent? How does that work?
Yeah. So I had mentioned that there were a few factors that went into play for why I wrote the book. One was that basically all the screenwriters in Hollywood had to fire their agents. I think it was in 2019, but it overlapped with the pandemic, because we were having a contract dispute, basically. So I love my agents, but I was actually not working with them at the time for something like 18 or 20 months. And so when I wrote this book, I couldn't bring it to them. But my wife is really good friends with a woman who is a literary agent, and was nice enough to pass it to her. And she liked the book and was willing to represent it. So I'm represented by Rachel Dillon Freed, who is a good friend of mine. And I probably wouldn't have been able to work with her had we not been on basically strike from our agents in Hollywood at the time. So
now are you back with your film agents?
So I am back with my film and television agents, and I assume that that agency has a book department as well. But I've stayed with Rachel for the book stuff.
So what was the process like of her shopping the book out and you getting offers or rejections?
Yeah, it felt very similar to film, where I had this finished product and she just said, I'm going to send it out I'm going to make a list and send it out. And I just sat and waited, fingers crossed. And we're lucky enough to get a little bit of interest. And I feel like it found its right home at Doubleday. And I love the editor that I'm working with, Rob Bloom. I got fantastic notes and made the drafts better. And I got really lucky.
So, I mean, that is a pretty great story because it's pretty rare that somebody's first novel goes anywhere. my first three didn't, even with a good agent.
I have a stack of scripts that never went anywhere before.
Oh, I'm sure.
Anything happened, for sure. Yeah, it's hard.
Do you feel like, I know editors will always say, we don't really care who you are. It's all about the story. But your film credentials, do you feel like that helped?
I would imagine. I mean, I'm under no illusion that I wrote the best book that's ever been seen by anybody. I think I know that it certainly helps books if they can be adapted into film and television. And I would imagine that since I have a little bit of experience in that, there was at least a belief that I might be slightly more successful than an author who doesn't have those connections and that track record. So right. And then it just goes back and forth. And then now I might be getting screenwriting jobs based on the fact that I've written a novel, as if that indicates that I'm a better writer than someone who hasn't. So, and I'll keep writing that. There's a smoke and mirrors aspect to it that, I think you do well to remind yourself of, so you don't think it's all about the stuff that you wrote. Yeah,
that's true. But I would probably contend that you having done both does make you a better writer because you have broadened your spectrum and have been able to kind of understand structure and dialogue in different kind of, types of formats. So I don't know how that wouldn't make you better.
Yeah. I mean, my TV experience definitely made breaking the story a much more familiar process, especially for a legal thriller.
And what was the process like when you got your first, I always like to ask, your first editorial notes?
Oh, they were fantastic. So my editor sent me an email and he said something to the effect of, look, these are all suggestions. This is your baby. Do with it what you will. But I hope this makes it better. And anyone who's worked, especially in television, knows that those are not the notes you get from TV executives, network executives, studios, actors. They are mandates when they come from those places. So it was a much easier and more collaborative experience.
Yeah, I always hear about notes with film and TV, and it's always like the people at the studio who don't know anything about writing are giving me notes and they're bullshit and I have to do them. So that always sounds like a nightmare. I think with editorial notes with novels, I mean that's it's a very kind letter.
Yeah,
I think most letters are like, hey, here are my suggestions, let's think about this, but it's never like mandates unless it's, something egregiously off.
Right.
But you seem to have a great perspective, which not all authors do, of like, wow, this is going to make this book better. And I'm grateful for these notes, even though it's going to be work to make the changes.
Yeah. And I'm sure sometimes authors get bad notes, but these notes were genuinely really good and helpful, and they did make the story better. So it was super easy to embrace. But yeah, I think coming from screenwriting going into this was a lot easier transition when you're talking about receiving notes than the other way around, because I can imagine it's really frustrating for authors who have suggestions coming their way to then be getting mandates about everything and all these rules and things that they have to conform to.
And on the other side of it, I tend to get suggestions that are not vague, but like, here's where I was, struggling with the manuscript a little bit, and it'll just be a very open note. And like, sometimes you're like, just tell me what to do, because it's going to be easier. Now I got to figure this out just because, you think this character doesn't quite connect. I'm like, what does that mean?
Yeah. And when you're not working for a studio and you're trying to develop something with a producer, sometimes you get really nice notes that sound like suggestions, and then you don't take them and you realize you're done with that producer now. The project has just died. So, yeah. Wow.
Yeah. So you're having to read personalities the entire time as well.
Yeah.
And so one of the things about novel writing, so for Doubleday, for example, when they're giving you an offer, a lot of times they want to know, like, well, what else do you have? We don't want to just invest in you as a one book person. So do you have that trajectory of like, I want to write a series and do, my film and TV work as well?
Yeah, well, So I developed it. So yeah, the sort of third thing that happened at the same time was that I had been up for a staff writing job on The Lincoln Lawyer, which was being developed as a TV series, and did not get that job. But because of it, I read the whole series and I absolutely loved it. It was a lot like watching The West Wing in college. All of a sudden I saw something that I wanted to try to emulate. And so, yeah, I developed The Local as and the character in it as sort of modeled after The Lincoln Lawyer, and that it could be a series of this lawyer constantly having new criminal cases to take on. So I didn't, so it was a 1-book deal, but I did sort of pitch the next 2 books in the series. So they knew that I had been thinking about it and that I wanted to continue it if it was a success.
So you're going to be very busy.
I hope so.
So when you're writing novels or screenplays, is there something that's, I know you're writing what you enjoy. Are you thinking about message much? Because I don't. I just write what's interesting to me. And people always ask me like, well, what did you want people to get out of this story? I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Do you have that in your mind, or you're like, I just think this is an interesting story and these are interesting characters and I want to follow them?
Yeah, that's how I do it. I think similar to how you do it. Occasionally I'll try to think deeper about some themes or messages in subsequent drafts, but I've tended to think that if I set out to just say something, it feels pedantic and
totally
it's not as good.
Right. Totally. And you kind of hope your subconscious is working and those messages are coming in because of whatever you're feeling at the time.
Totally agree. Like you read it and you see that there are themes present in anything you're writing, but maybe you didn't even set out to do it. But once they kind of show themselves, you can lean into it a bit. But yeah, totally.
I was doing an interview last week and the person interviewing me had read the book, my latest book that just came out. And they're like, oh, this is a book about grief. And I'm like, yeah. Is it?
Yeah.
I don't know. Right. That wasn't like my intention, but that's great for me that's how you're taking it because you've seen that kind of, and maybe that's what resonates with you because of whatever you're going through. So it totally depends. And are you, writing legal thrillers, or writing legal anything, I think would be fairly challenging, but it's obviously speaking towards, kind of your unpursued profession.
Yes.
Is it exciting to dig back into that? And you probably have to be, somewhat current on, whatever relevant case law you're dealing with. So you're not, having antiquated rulings.
Yeah, no, I love talking with lawyers. I've worked on 2 legal shows, The Good Fight and Your Honor. And so I've gotten to work with a lot of lawyers turned writers. And then I have a lot of lawyer friends and family members, and I annoy them by asking them endless amounts of questions. And it was a buddy of mine I went to college with who is an intellectual property lawyer. And he's the one that told me all about this small town in Texas that The Local is set in. I think I wanted to be a lawyer because I saw a few too many Tom Cruise movies in the 90s, but so I'd rather write about it.
You need me on that wall.
Exactly.
And then it's a little bit different too. Like you have, I think your book comes out in June, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yep.
You're going to have events that are all about you and not about, a movie where you were a part of it, and you're going to be doing, speaking engagements and signings. I mean, that's got to be exciting / scary, different.
Yeah, it is. It's exciting and different. There is a nice aspect to being a writer of a movie, and then you can sit in a dark theater and watch it. And then maybe you watch Rob Reiner and Woody Harrelson answer questions and entertain people. And the few times I was on panels, I was painfully aware that I was the least interesting person there, and people were not there to hear from me. So it is going to be a little bit of a different experience, but it's sort of fun it's just you and your story, and
for better or for worse. Right.
Yeah. Right. Exactly.
Totally. Yeah, no, it is exciting. And do you feel like, what I've learned over 20 years of doing this is like the importance of being kind of an industry participant for whatever that means, but just like it would be in any other business, going to conferences, networking with other authors.
Yeah.
Do you see yourself doing more of that on kind of the novel side of things?
Absolutely. I think I was really hesitant to do that for the screenwriting stuff. When I first came to LA, I heard so much about networking, and I knew that was not going to be a specialty of mine. And who knows, maybe that hindered me, and maybe it slowed.
Do you feel you're introverted, or why is that?
Yeah, a bit introverted. I mean, I'm not super shy, and I'm happy to, I can get on a panel without freaking out. But it does take a lot of my energy. I think that's why I'm an introvert, because I'd rather be at home on my couch with my wife and kid. But yeah, and I don't know exactly how much of a participant I can be in promoting a movie as a screenwriter, but I do understand that it's just me in the book. But it's also, there's something about, I don't know, asking people to spend that much time to read a book, that if they're willing to do that, I'm really happy to actually interact with anybody who took the time to do that. So I am excited about it.
For sure. And you're part of a team, right? So everyone on your publishing team is doing their job to make sure the book has the greatest amount of success it can, which means that, they need you to promote on social media, to go out and speak, and to be an engaging speaker. And, I'm teaching a class on marketing for the thriller writer, and it is true. It's kind of like, there's so much stuff you can do, but you should still kind of adhere to like what you want to do, like, because you can't do everything. But you do have to do your part aside from writing the book to give it the best potential success. Are you going to do you know about Thriller Fest?
I do. So I'm working on the second season of Your Honor, the Showtime show with Bryan Cranston. So unfortunately, I'm in a writer's room right now, and I Thriller Fest is it's in June, right? Or the end of May?
Yeah, it's at the end of this month into June.
Yeah. So I don't think I'm going to be able to make it, unfortunately, but that is exactly the type of stuff I want to be doing. Yeah. But I mean, actually, of all the things you listed, it's the social media of it that makes me really not want to participate.
But it doesn't have to be that hard. And you'll probably have help from, if Doubleday PR team, can just send you image, like, here, post this. That's super helpful. And give me the hashtags too. I don't want to research hashtags. Just tell me what to post. and I'll post.
I can't believe I'm 40 years old and I'm having to ask how Facebook works, but this is where we are.
It's true. But the other part of it is like, as people start, like you said, people are investing a lot of time to read your book as opposed to seeing a movie. And when they see the movie, they're not necessarily, I think, thinking about you.
Right.
So they love, readers love interaction. Like if you even just like writing them back, say, hey, thanks for reviewing. That's awesome. That goes a long way, but it does take more time out of the day for sure.
Yeah. No, you're reminding me of sort of the screenings that we did for LBJ when they came out, and we did a lot where there were, Rob and Woody were there and fancy people were there. And that was always interesting, but I also snuck into just a few theaters to watch it with 10 people in it. And that was always more interesting. And
I'm sure
to hear the chatter. Yeah. So I'm hoping it'll be more like that experience. It's a little more intimate and you just get some honest feedback. And
that's like reading your Goodreads reviews.
Yeah.
And they're like, exactly. Wait, why am I doing this? This was a terrible decision.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. I may regret saying that, but yeah.
That's awesome. Well, I'm excited for your book coming out, and we're going to do a quick storytelling before we wrap this up.
Yeah.
And I pulled 3 books off of my bookshelf.
Okay.
And I'm going to have you choose one of them, and then we're going to pick a page and a sentence, and we're just going to go back and forth for a couple minutes and see where it goes. But these are literally just random. Frederick Forsyth's The Avenger. They're all fiction. Harlan Coben's The Innocent, and J.D. Barker's The Fourth Monkey. So all kinds.
Let's go with The Innocent.
Thriller. Yes. Okay, cool. Give me a page between 1 and 500.
127.
I just did this with a 15-year-old, and
really?
she started her own newspaper. She's amazing.
Oh, wow.
But the storytelling part was, we just had to kind of talk about the story, because sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. This is all dialogue. So give me a sentence between 1 and 10.
8.
Okay. All right. So, and I'm going to actually read 2 sentences because it has the word legal in the second sentence, and I feel like that's apropos. So I'm going to read this, and then you can go first. I can go first, whatever you want to do. Here are the 2 sentences. It's dialogue. No, I mean, he's been dead for 3 years now? I can't believe they let an ex-con paralegal keep a space like this.
As we walked around the warehouse. We looked for signs of life, but none showed themselves.
It smelled wet concrete, and reminded me of my childhood, and I don't quite know why. Maybe because it was so dark and creepy in here, and I had such a troubled past. As we rounded the corner, we saw the shoe poking out from behind the door.
I knew immediately there was a leg inside of it, but I paused before walking over there. The smell hit me before I saw the body. I knew before we turned him over whose face it was.
It's Frank, I told my partner. He looked at me and said, "No shit." As we turned him over, there was a gaping wound right in the middle of his chest. Not enough time for flies to have set in yet, but that wouldn't be long.
Knowing Frank, I had to do a quick search to see if the weapon was nearby, if it was a wound that had been inflicted by himself. Seeing no gun, I realized this had to have been a crime.
He had it coming, I knew that for sure, but it was still shocking to see the body. And as many bodies as I've seen in my life, this one was surprising in a different way. Surprising because Frank, this 45-year-old enforcer for the local Russo family, had a face full of lipstick.
It made me think not of Frank in that moment, but of his sister. And I wondered, is her number still in my phone? And should I be the one to call her and tell her what happened to Frank?
That's good. I think we're going to call it there.
Great.
That's fun, right?
Yeah, that is fun.
Yeah. See where it goes and see, are you on the same length? It is very improv-y, right? Where you just have to accept each other's premise, and you have to just keep moving forward with it. So it always sparks it is challenging. Some people freak out entirely. Yeah. And I'm like, I got to do this every time. I'm the one who should be freaking out.
You're probably getting really good at it, though.
I don't know. Most of the time it's a shit show. Well, Joey, it was great talking to you, and I'm very excited for your book. That's it'll be interesting to see what your experience is like going, having such a successful screenwriting career to now becoming a novelist and then going back and forth. And I'm sure it's going to those two disciplines, I'm sure, are just going to complement each other as you progress with your career.
I hope so. Well, thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. Talk to you later. Take it easy, Joey.
Thank you.
Bye.
You too. Bye.
That was my conversation with Joey Hartstone. He was a good guy. I really enjoyed talking to him and learning a bit more about the film industry. So that was very, very cool. And if you want to find out more about Joey, you can just go to his website, joeyhartstone.com. And if you want to find out more about me, check my appearance dates or subscribe to my newsletter, please just go to carterwilson.com. That's it for now. More episodes of Making It Up out soon. In the meantime, I appreciate you, as always, watching and or listening. Take care.